Bonjour French 203 students, bienvenue au vidéo 9 du chapitre 7. So welcome to video 8 of chapter 7, our final presentation for this chapter. And so after this, we are about 25% through French 203. It's kind of hard to believe we're already there so quickly. What I decided to do for this final topic for the relative pronouns qui, que, et dont was to kind of create my own presentation on this, a little bit separate from what the textbook teaches. It can be a tough distinction, understanding the ways to use qui, que, et dont, and so I created some different sentences and ways of looking at this that I hope will help you understand the difference. All right, so first let's look at qui. All right. So I've come up with an example sentence, a first example sentence here in English to kind of break this down step by step how this works. I think it's actually really important to understand how this structure first works in English before you understand how it works in French. In fact, one of the most helpful books I ever read when I was studying French a long time ago, back when I was like in my 20s, was Understanding English, or I think it was English Grammar for Students of French. It's an excellent book. There's one for Spanish and I think one for German too. And it really teaches you a lot about English just by the way it explains the French rules. So I think this might be a good example of this right here. So if I had these two sentences, this is the girl kissed me. Hey, I probably wouldn't want to repeat the girl and the girl, right? It seems repetitive, like I don't need to say that twice. I, of course, could replace the girl with she. Okay, I could say, this is the girl, she kissed me. It'd be a little less repetitive, but most people would probably go to the next option, which is, this is the girl who kissed me. So what is who doing here? Okay, the purpose of this who is to join these two sentences together to make the sentence a little more interesting, a little smoother structure, and to avoid repetition. And what this thing is called right here, who kissed me, is a relative clause. I think sometimes when you look at a grammar book and you see a term like relative clause, it just sounds a little scary. It's like, oh my God, relative clause, what is that? A clause is really nothing more than a subject and a verb put together. It's a sentence. So clause, I used to think it sounded a little bit scary years ago when I first started learning about grammar, but it's really not that scary. Relative just means one part relates to another. So she kissed me is a clause. It's a complete sentence. If I want to join it to the sentence before and relate it to the sentence before because two parts are the same, the girl and the girl, I'm just putting them together using a word that allows me to do that, which is who in this case. Okay, I can see the same thing with the French sentence. This is a translation of the English sentence above. Okay, c'est la fille. This is the girl. La fille m'a embrassé. The girl kissed me, or she kissed me, or the girl in this case. Again, in French, I wouldn't want to repeat these two words. C'est la fille m'a embrassé, because it sounds repetitive. Okay, I could, like I did above, I could replace this with elle, but I think I can still combine these into something else. C'est la fille qui m'a embrassé. Okay, so what does all this mean? Qui acts like a subject for the relative clause. So this relative clause, who kissed me, who is just taking the place of the repeated girl, or she, so I don't have to say it again. Qui is doing the same thing. It's just taking the place of the repeated la fille or elle, so you don't have to say it again. And you can combine them into one sentence. Yay. And you will notice whenever you use qui, that what comes after it is going to be a verb, because who is the subject, kissed is a verb. Qui is the subject, a embrasser in this case, in French word order, would be the verb. Okay, qui a embrassé, and then moi is like the me at the end in English. Okay, so if you're using qui to join two sentences, just remember that the word that comes after it needs to be a verb. And in English, the verb comes directly after it. In French, there could be like an object that comes after, like me, but you're going to be looking for a verb. Qui a embrassé quelqu'un? Okay, let's look at some other examples of this. Okay, there's that boy. Now, that boy beat me up. So I might not want to repeat it, so I could say, he beat me up. It's a little bit better, but if I want to make it even smoother, I can say, there's that boy who beat me up. Okay, so who is going to join the sentences in a smooth way. In French, exactly the same thing. Voilà le garçon. Le garçon m'a battu. So, il m'a battu. Voilà le garçon, il m'a battu. Okay, that's not so good. He beat me up. But I want to combine this now into one word that's going to join the entire thing into one sentence. Voilà le garçon qui m'a battu. Again, I have in English, who, followed by the verb, beat me up. Who beat? And in French, qui a battu, qui m'a battu. Who beat me up. Okay. Another way we can use qui would be in a sentence where we're adding a little extra descriptive phrase after a subject. So, Anne, who was angry, stopped talking to John. Now, Anne is the subject of my sentence. I could leave this part out. I could actually just strike through it and the sentence would still be fine. I could say, Anne stopped talking to John. And that would be a sentence. But maybe I want to add a little extra information about her, so I can add in between commas, Anne, who was angry, stopped talking to John. Okay, so I can use who to refer back to her. Oh, who was angry. Notice it's followed by a verb in English. Okay, same thing in French. Anne, qui était en colère, a arrêté de parler à John. So, Anne, or Anne, who was angry, était en colère. Okay, again, this qui is just referring back to Anne. It's adding some extra information about her. So that's another way you can use qui. Same thing here. David, or David, who is my friend, helped me study for my French test. Again, I could strike this through, leave it out, and say, David helped me study for my French test. But I want to add some extra information about him, so, and this should be David, of course, right? Okay, so who refers back to David and gives some extra information about him. Okay, and the same thing in French. David, qui est mon ami, m'a aidé à étudier pour mon examen de français. Okay, so both who and qui serve the same purpose in that sentence as well. Okay, so I think if you imagine qui as kind of being related to subject, the subject or main actor of the sentence, that might help you determine when you need to use that relative pronoun. All right, the other one we need to look at is que. Okay, so que is a little bit different than qui, as you'll see from the example sentences that I will share with you. So the English sentences I have up here, this is the girl. Hey, I kissed the girl. So now in this case, again, I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want to say girl a bunch of times. I could replace this with her, but that's probably still a little repetitive, and the sentences are a little short and choppy. So I could combine these and say, this is the girl who I kissed. Okay, so that's how I can combine these into one sentence in English. Okay, now, when I want to do this in French, it's going to be a pretty similar procedure. Oh, c'est la fille. Okay, it's the girl. J'ai embrassé la fille. Okay, so I don't want to repeat myself. So I can say, c'est la fille que j'ai embrassée. The thing you're going to notice after using que in French is that you're going to have a subject and a verb. J'ai embrassé, I kissed, not just a verb. So this is the girl that I kissed or who I kissed. You could actually say who or that in English. They would both sound fine. So rather than, I think the difference to notice here is that when you're using que, it's taking the place of the object of a verb. La fille is the object of embrasser in this case. Okay, so que is taking the place of that object. So it really, I think the choice of qui or que really depends on which word you are replacing in your new sentence. Okay, so c'est la fille, j'ai embrassé la fille, c'est la fille que j'ai embrassé. J'ai embrassé quelqu'un, somebody, j'ai embrassé la fille. Okay, c'est la fille que j'ai embrassée. All right, so let's look at another example of this. And we'll move me down a little bit here. Okay, what is your friend's name? You invited that friend yesterday. So let's say I want to combine these into one sentence. I don't want to repeat friend 2 times. Okay, what is the name of your friend who you invited yesterday? So if I want to compile this into one sentence, I invited the friend, okay? So you invited, okay, the friend that you invited, I want to eliminate that repeated friend. So to do that, I can just use who and then continue on with my sentence. I think this difference between qui and que is not as obvious in English because we use the same relative pronoun, who or who for qui and que, but in French, that's where you need to make a distinction. So, comment s'appelle ton ami? Tu as invité cet ami hier. Okay, so tu as invité cet ami. You invited that friend. Okay, so what is the name of your friend that you invited yesterday? So tu as invité somebody, the friend. Who is that person? You replace that person with que. So, comment s'appelle ton ami que tu as invité hier? Okay, so I think the main distinction between qui and que is that qui is taking the place of a subject in a sentence. Que is taking the place of a direct object. Tu as invité quelqu'un. That quelqu'un, that someone, gets replaced by que. Okay, and as we could see in the previous slide, what comes after que is a subject plus a verb. Tu as invité. Okay, who you invited. Okay. And finally, the last of these that we'll look at is le pronom relatif dont. All right, dont is similar to qui and que. Okay, it's used to link sentences but means whom, of which, about whom, and these are like forms we don't even use very much in spoken English anymore. I think our language has become these forms are basically kind of dropping out of usage. They're becoming less common. They sound more formal, I think, and when we speak informally with friends and family, we just don't tend to use whom very much these days anymore. But the form dont is still going to be very common in French. And it's used when the verb in the second clause is followed by de. We can't end a sentence or a clause with de in French. We can in English, we cannot in French, and you'll see why with this example. So the man who I was talking about, or the man who I was talking of, people would say this all the time in English. You can't say that in French. So I put the little asterisk here to indicate that that would be ungrammatical in French. L'homme que je parlais de doesn't really work. So the man about whom I was talking, okay, l'homme dont je parlais, so the man about whom je parlais, because in French, parler is followed by de. It would be parler de quelqu'un. Okay, and because we have to use de after parler. You need to use donc when you connect this all together. So, l'homme dont je parlais. Parler de quelqu'un. All right, let's look at a couple of other examples of this. These expressions like avoir besoin de or avoir peur de, se servir de, we see a lot of these expressions with avoir that use de at the end. We'll need to use donc when we kind of combine these into a sentence. So in English, I might say, here's the book that I need, okay? In French, it's going to be voici le livre dont j'ai besoin. Why do I use dont? Because normally, j'ai besoin is followed by de. So, avoir besoin de, it's kind of like saying, here's the book of which I need. It would sound really awkward in English, but it's the way we need to do it in French. Or, here's the book that I use every day. In French would be voici le livre dont je me sers tous les jours. So here's the book of which I serve myself every day. Okay. And finally, here's the teacher I'm scared of. So see, in English, we end sentences with prepositions all the time. We don't do that in French. It would be voici le prof dont j'ai peur. No, j'ai peur de quelqu'un. Okay, so here's the professor I'm scared of. Voici le prof dont j'ai peur. J'ai peur de quelqu'un. That person would be the professor, and that would be represented by dont. All right, and finally, dont can be used to represent whose, which is another relative pronoun. So, voici le garçon dont le père est maire. Okay, here is the boy whose father is mayor. So if you're using whose, this is, I guess, a little easier translation, I think. Or l'homme dont le frère est notre facteur, the man whose brother is our postman or mail carrier, est très riche. Okay, so dont in that case also means whose. Okay, so I think it would be very helpful to study all the examples in this presentation. I think the distinction between qui and que is probably a little bit easier to see. The distinction between que and dont is a little harder to see. I think if you keep in mind that que is always going to be followed by a subject and a verb, whereas dont is really all about verbs that are followed by de. Since you can't end a sentence or a clause with de, like of, you need to use don't. So you have to be really aware of which verb you're using when you put together your sentence. Does that verb have de after it? Like avoir besoin de, avoir peur de, se servir de, parler de. If you're using one of those verbs and you're combining sentences, there's a strong chance you're going to need to use don't in order to do that. Okay. So, any questions you have about this topic, it is probably a little more difficult grammatically than some other topics. Please feel free to ask me questions by email, to drop by office hours, and we'll go through these examples together. So I wish you good luck in the coming week, and à la prochaine!